Hello, Startup Vision. I'm Pascal Unger, Managing Director at Darling Ventures.
Hello, Pascal. Thank you so much for being with us today. You're very far away for this interview. You're in Switzerland right now, getting back to San Francisco soon. So Darling Ventures is a San Francisco-based seed stage venture fund. And you define yourself as being at the frontier of technology innovation, looking for divergent thinking founders. What do you mean?
Yeah, so it does sound, I guess, a lot more complicated than it is. But ultimately, what we like to do is most of the investments we make is into domain expert founders that have some kind of a rare insight into the problem that they're solving. So typically, these founders have worked in an industry for many years or have worked on that problem inside a corporate for many years. And they just like they can't stop thinking about it to the degree that the only thing they can basically do in their minds is just to spin out and start their own firm or their own startup to solve these problems. And so they're very deep backgrounds. We like to back founders where at least one of the founders has very technical expertise. They also have very valuable networks in a way that makes them uniquely positioned to launch their product and their solution and build an exceptional company around it. And just to give you an example, I know one of your recent guests was Ravi from the Hive, and one of our recent investments was into one of their companies in the healthcare space, where all of the three founders have at least 20 to one of them even 30 years of experience in the healthcare industry, which is incredibly important if you want to sell to the big healthcare providers, just to have that domain expertise, to have that credibility. Some of the founders have worked on either like selling to their current customers when they were at their prior companies, or have even worked at them. And that's incredibly important to get off the ground. And then there's a couple of other things that we look for. So it's one of the questions we always ask ourselves is like, do the founders have a unique insight that addresses a real market need, as I preferably paired with the domain expertise? Are they leveraging some kind of a technology or a market or a user behavior inflection point? And then preferably paired with some kind of a transformative technology. So do they kind of build up the moat via the technology that they're developing? And then obviously things like the product, the market, the team, potentially the traction, and so on.
So you were very visionary in what you said in last March 2020 about the new ways of working. You were predicting an acceleration of adoption rates and fast scaling also thanks to remote and virtual work. So how do you see things today?
Yeah. So I still very much believe that the world that as we kind of knew it prior to March 2020, we're not going to go back to that world. It's interesting to see as a side comment. So we're a fund where all of our own investors are either from Europe or from Australia, but all of our investments are in the US or Canada. So part of our value proposition to our LPs is kind of providing them with access to North American early stage venture. And if you look at kind of what I hear and see over here in Europe, people still believe that this is kind of a bit of a phase, and let's just kind of hunker down. And once people got the vaccine and we're over this, we're kind of going to go back to the world the way it was. When I talk to people in the US, it's very different, and I'm very much in the camp of like the world as we knew it, we're not going to go back to it. So many things like kind of that have changed, and yeah, remote work is part of it. Also, anything broadly with technology adoption, in especially in many industries that were very hesitant in adopting technology, that all has been significantly accelerated, and I believe that many of these changes are here to stay. I do believe that the velocity of changes is going to slow down once we're going to go back to a life without COVID, but we're not going to go back on any of these trends. These trends are long-term trends, and they're going to they're going to continue basically. Technology is going to continue being a bigger and bigger part of our lives. And just I guess as one more psychom just for myself, and we quickly discussed this prior, I basically also, given how hard San Francisco was hit by this pandemic and the fact that everything is virtual, that people don't need to be in the Bay Area anymore, I also personally decided for myself that the best way to kind of continue doing our job, which is fully virtual at the moment, or to kind of use the situation as an advantage, is if I start being in different interesting startup ecosystems for 2 months at a time, trying to build up interesting networks outside of the Bay Area. As I said, I don't believe that the Bay Area is going to go back to where it was with regard to its importance for startups and venture investing prior to the pandemic.
So that's very, very interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting move, definitely. And Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one most adaptable to change. Finally, isn't it the definition of what we call being agile in the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess you do need a certain intelligence to be able to adapt or recognize circumstances and adapt to them. But yes, 100%. I mean, ultimately, one of the biggest benefits that startups and especially early stage startups have is that they're very kind of nimble or agile and can thus adapt to situations and new ideas much faster than incumbents or larger companies. And like this agility is very important in the earliest days of startup building, as you're kind of trying to figure out how to position yourself, or as you're trying to kind of find the product market fit. And then also we saw when the world kind of throws extreme situations at you, which we saw in March, when everyone thought the world was going to come to a standstill, and Sequoia published their famous kind of second Black Swan memo, basically. That yeah, the startups that ended up thriving some of the time, some had a bunch of tailwinds, but some didn't, and the ones that ended up thriving were the ones that were able to adapt to the new situation the most. I think the most famous example is Airbnb, which raised a significant down round in the first half of 2020, and then had a phenomenal IPO and even better performance post the IPO.
Yeah, so you're optimistic and you see the black swan going away, I hope.
100%. And I said it for I think that for everyone who lives in the world of technology, this was as mentioned, an incredible acceleration. I think the biggest challenges that we have ahead of us is more the fact that anyone who can't kind of live in this online and virtual world and work in it is left behind even more than before. And like this is not a sustainable state that we're in, and you see that in a lot of on the political side and everything as well. Kind of solving these problems and addressing that is going to be absolutely critical over the next couple of years.
So technology companies are more and more committed to social impact and planet preservation. How does Darling plan to reshape the future?
Well, we try to reshape it as much as we can, but in all seriousness, as kind of first check investors that we like to be, we can play a very catalyzing role for startups, and so when we decide to invest, this can make a big difference, and we're very aware of that. We recently launched a new fund, and we had a longer discussion, Daniel and myself, who lead the firm, whether or not we should put a kind of an impact angle onto the firm and our investing or not. And ultimately, we said it's very easy to kind of label anything you do, like put an impact angle on it, and so it can get a bit fluffy. And ultimately, the way we framed it is like we only, or one of our very important diligence criteria is the mission of the startup aligned with our own values. We have a very strong kind of set of values, and our LPs that all know us know what our values are. And so with that, like we won't invest in anything that doesn't kind of go basically against our values. But it isn't always fully an impact investment. And so out of the new fund, we made 4 investments to date, and for 3, you can definitely say that they have a very strong impact component. For example, one of the recent investments that we did is a company called Stark. And what they do is they are a software to help make software design and development more accessible. There's about 20% of the world's population that has some kind of a disability. And a lot of the software that we see today is not accessible depending on the disability. And so their big mission is to help make the world's software more accessible. And so this is the kind of investment that we do like to do, despite the official kind of lack of impact stamp that we have.
That's great, definitely. Thank you so much, Pascal, for sharing all your thoughts and vision for this new world. And hopefully we'll speak soon with better things, for the future. Thank you so much for participating.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. This was a real pleasure.